every day.
It also shows you how much people don't want to leave their house in general. You know, I wonder whether or not, you know, people will continue. I mean, I think they probably will if they continue doing it even when normal services are restored. Excuse me, I'm just trying to get a few of the technology things set up.
Yes. Also could be great, by the way, if the office sent the links for the different classes, because I was 15 minutes going around every email trying to find where is the link for this class, because they don't send all the links for every class in every email that they send. And that's a problem.
Well, you mean that many people don't keep the links handy, and they need to be, need to be sent again and again?
Yes, yes. People have other things in life than keeping one link in one email of 100, 200 that you receive every day. And after 1 week, you have no idea where is that link. So I don't think it's so difficult to keep like the signature of every email that the signature sent, the synagogue sent as a signature, have their 4 links. It's not the end of the world. It's not so much work. It will not take more than 30 seconds and can make much easier for everyone else to connect. That's my humble opinion.
Sorry, just trying to still get everything lined up.
Because people are losing the connection also on that. It's difficult to start like looking around where are the links. They say no, they give up, whatever. I walk away. And it's only 30 seconds, just put us over the signature of the synagogue, every email, every communication, the links. Those are my 2 cents.
There we go.
Shalom.
How are you doing?
Okay.
All right, let me just get the page.
1:6, right, Rabbi?
Yes. Okay, let me check our YouTube folks. Not seeing anybody there. Oh, one's watching. All right, so let us do the excuse me. The way buttons appear and disappear is very frustrating in Zoom. Depending upon the thickness of the window, it doesn't always give you all the options.
I know, Rabbi, also like continue with the conversation that we started before you started the class. There are already people that are looking online, because literally you can go to any synagogue, to other synagogues, because they have a different service, more interactive, and they can allow them to read Torah and everything. And also we can start losing people if it's a long 1 or 2 or 3 months in that situation. It's not fun and very inspired to see 4 people there.
All right, so like I said, please send that to the ritual committee and we can talk about it there, but let's talk about Mishnah tonight.
Okay, so what is the ritual or is the board?
No, it starts at ritual first. If ritual is not willing to recommend it, then I think you're going to have a hard time getting the board to support it.
I don't care. Like I'm the one that believes
Natan,
you
can we talk about this?
vote with your feet.
Natan, can we talk about this when we're not broadcasting?
Yes, sure.
Because this is going on YouTube forever, because I don't feel like editing my YouTube videos when I stream them. Okay, so I think we've got our usual collection of folks, and let's go ahead and get started on Mishnah Eruvin. Hopefully everybody remembers a little bit about where we were. If you weren't here last week, I am not going to repeat the introduction. You can go back and watch last week's video. This The Eruvin is one of the more complicated topics. And if I have to repeat the introduction every week, we're never going to make any progress. So if you have some questions as we go, by all means ask. But if I tell you, go back and look at the introduction from last week, please don't be offended. It's just that we spent more than half of last week's lesson trying to prepare the groundwork for this Masechet. And I don't want to do that every single week. If I can answer the question you have, by all means, please ask. I will try to do it within the context of tonight. But don't be disappointed if I say, you know what, go back and check the video. All right, so we are on chapter 1, Mishnah 6, and we are continuing talking about the opening of an alleyway and what it takes to mark that opening as being an opening to an alleyway, and therefore allowing the carrying within that alleyway and the courtyards that are attached to it. Good. So we're talking about the side posts. These are the edges of the alleyway. The side posts, which they spoke about, must be no less than 10 hand breadths in height, but their width and thickness may be of any size whatsoever. So going up, you need a minimum of 10 tefachim, 10 hand breadths. That's about 30 some inches, about 1 meter tall. Not coincidentally, in Sukkot, that is the same height, minimum height for a sukkah. If you ever have a sukkah lower than 1 meter, you can't use it. If it's only 1 meter, you can, but you're probably going to find it a little bit cramped. So it has to be that tall, but how thick it is, or rather, point to the camera, how thick it is, or how wide it is, that there is no minimum measure. So it can be any amount of width or thickness as long as it is that minimum 10 tefachim high, 30 inches, about 1 meter high. Rabbi Yossi says their width must be no less than 3 hand breadths. He disagrees. He thinks you need about a 10-inch hand breadth for their width in order for them to be substantial enough. Rabbi Yossi loses this argument. Okay, questions, comments? So why do you think the rabbis are being so lenient on this shape of the posts? Any ideas?
Say it again, Rabbi.
Why do you think the rabbis are being so lenient? By rabbis, I mean the majority of the sages are being so lenient on well, many aspects of Eruvin, on allowing different ways to create this artificial structure which permits carrying within these spaces.
Hey, Rabbi, just to make sure I understand this right, you only need 1 post of no minimum width, right?
Yes, that's right. The only reason why they mention, as the commentary points out, the only reason why they mention multiple posts is to cover for even those rabbis who had said you needed 2 posts. They agree that 10 tefachim is the minimum height.
And it uses the plural word posts.
Well, and that's, like I said, why the commentary points out that the plural is only there for those who didn't agree with our earlier discussions in the first few Mishnayot. Okay, so let me go ahead and try and give an explanation. This is going to be a recurring theme throughout Eruvin. I mentioned it a bit last week. I'm going to mention it again a few times this week, I think. But I want you to get this sort of into our head. Most of the carrying that is being permitted by the rabbis through Masechet Eruvin, through the construction of these shared spaces, most of that carrying was permitted by the Torah, but had been prohibited by the rabbis to avoid any accidental transgressions of the Torah prohibitions. This is something we went over in more detail in the last week. So conceptually, what that means is the rabbis are being very lenient with finding a way to permit what they themselves had prohibited. Right? They are not being lenient with what the Torah prohibited. They're being lenient with their own restrictions. Think of this as being like if you have a teenager and your teenager is going out for the night and you say, I need you to be home by 9 o'clock. Right? Okay, fine. That's your rule about what time the teenager is supposed to be home. The actual rule for the government depends on where you live. Sometimes it's 11, sometimes it's midnight. It depends on local rules, but there usually is a curfew from the local city government. But your curfew might be earlier than the city curfew. But that means when you say, yes, but if you're going to so-and-so's house and you're studying for a test, then yes, you can come home when it's 10 o'clock or you can come home 11 o'clock. Now, that doesn't mean you're being lenient on the curfew the government set. It means you're being lenient on your own curfew. And that's really what's happening throughout Masechet Eruvin. The rabbis are being lenient on the restriction they set by themselves in order to protect the Torah, but they're not being lenient on the Torah itself.
And Rabbi,
yes.
If one of the poles falls down, you have to drop anything that's in your hand, right?
So yeah, I mean, in general, the general rule is that if an eruv is broken, then carrying is no longer permitted. Just done.
And you can't even walk back to your house. You got to drop it. Right there.
Let me be clear. If the eruv fails, you cannot carry any more at all. Right? Just full stop. But that, of course, is only if you are aware that the eruv failed. This is a common issue in the modern eruv world, where if the eruv is up, but there's a storm, people will often wait until they've got power reconnected, or they can check on the internet to make sure that the eruv is still intact. Okay. We're not going to go into too much detail. Go ahead.
I mean, the eruv that you're talking about now is the cable they put around the city, right?
Yes, as I was just about ready to say, we're not going to go into too much detail yet. Maybe we'll do that as when we finish the Masechet. Maybe we'll talk in more detail about how a modern city eruv works. But yes, in the modern city there are eruvim. Well, in many cities with a large Jewish population, and there is usually a way to have a notice of whether the eruv is up or whether the eruv is down. And if the eruv is down, you don't carry. But usually, because the eruv nowadays is so large, usually the average person doesn't know whether it's up or down just by looking out their window. And so that can get a little bit confusing in the modern world, but as long as you don't know that it's down, carrying is what you can do. As long as you're not deliberately, making yourself, I'm not looking, then
yeah. Okay. So if the eruv is blocked or something, but we cannot carry, right?
Correct. If the eruv is down, then there is no eruv. Just you go back to the default condition for your town.
So I have to check all the time the before Shabbat, before any festival, the eruv is intact.
Well, check and check. I mean, usually most people don't check constantly unless there's a reason for them to think there might be a problem.
Okay. Gotcha.
Up in Baltimore, when we'd get big storms coming through, you would double check that the eruv was still up, and there was a website to do that.
Okay.
In other places where it's a smaller city or something, it's probably a lot easier to check it just by, people would tell you, hey, oh, by the way, did you hear the eruv went down?
But Rabbi, don't a lot of people not use their computers on Shabbat to check?
No. You wouldn't check on Shabbat. You would check before Shabbat.
Yeah.
Once Shabbat starts, as long as you believe and have a reason to believe that the eruv is up, you're good. But remember, the rabbis are being lenient with what the rabbis prohibited. They're not trying to make a bunch of neurotic people who are all, afraid to step outside their house. But they do want to make sure that people don't accidentally break what the Torah prohibited.
But the eruv is work for Shabbat too to carry?
Yes, the eruv gives permission for carrying on Shabbat. That is the entire purpose of the eruv.
So on the city or use on because I remember the explanation you give it to us when you got like a tree house connected with the patio, and you can put like a piece of bread and make a eruv. That's different eruv, right?
No. So imagine your city, right? You've got a nice city, but just because you have a city and just because you have an eruv doesn't mean you can carry everywhere in the city. You can only carry what the eruv actually covers. Like I said, and I'm going to be firm here, I'm not going to talk about the modern eruv.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about alleyways, and we're eventually, I think tonight, going to talk about a camping situation when you're out with the caravan. But the modern eruv deals with a lot of concepts we haven't even begun to talk about yet.
Okay.
So trying to explain it now, I'm going to have to teach the entire tractate of Eruvin without having taught the tractate of Eruvin. So hold questions on modern Eruvin until the last class of the
Yeah, I'm after this one. I'll look the video. I'll do.
And that's fine too. But I want to focus on their world, their architecture, their cities, their situation. Eventually, we'll talk about how that applies to us.
Okay. Yes.
We got to work our way up.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And what happens if someone discover during Shabbat that the roof is broken?
Then you stop carrying.
Yeah,
So
but what happens is a community area, and suddenly.
Hold on. So let me just explain. Right, you're in your courtyard, and you come out, and a tree has fallen, and it has smashed open one half of the alleyway. So now the alleyway is open to the world. Right? Okay, you can't carry it anymore in your courtyard. Done.
What happens if it's in a neighborhood and something happened and one part of the roof in your neighborhood is broken, and when you are walking to the synagogue, you discover it. So what do? You are already carrying you and all the whole community. What do you do in the middle of Shabbat?
You stop. You don't carry any further. If you reach a point where you see the tree is down, it's broken open a wall in the alleyway, now this is no longer protected by an eruv, then you stop carrying. And that means you can stay and wait with your property. You can send somebody to notify others that there's an issue. You can have your kids stay and watch whatever you were carrying while you go and do whatever you were going to do. But yeah, you can no longer carry within an area that is not covered by an eruv. Okay, chapter 1, Mishnah 7. So we are continuing to talk about these side posts on the opening to the alleyway. One may make the side posts out of anything, even something that is alive. But Rabbi Yossi prohibits this. And by something alive, they literally mean an animal. Tie up your horse, tie up your elephant, tie up your creature, so that they are the post on the edge of the entranceway to the alley, and bam, you now have the marker to make the eruv. Again, it has to be 10 tefachim high. It has to be 30 inches high, about a meter. And the reason, according to the commentary, why Rabbi Yossi disagrees is because if the animal dies, the animal is going to shrink, and then it may not be the right height. So you can.
But they don't have any problem to have an elephant for Sukkot. That's one of the wars, and the same problem. So for Sukkot, they don't have problem to have an animal life, and here, yes.
Well, some opinions said that it was okay to have the animal. Some said no. But yes, in the end, the halacha is not to make the wall alive-ish. A very interesting extension of this is that you can actually make an eruv out of human beings, but that's a whole nother story. And we'll talk about that maybe another time. Then it gets on to a side conversation. As long as we're talking about the animal and what it can be used for, it can also cause defilement as the covering of a tomb. But Rabbi Meir makes pure. Basically means if you use an animal as one of the coverings for a tomb, then the animal would be considered to be ritually impure, because the impurity within the tomb would be transmitted to the animal. Now, normally animals can't be made ritually impure. If it's still alive, it doesn't get made ritually impure. And that's what Rabbi Meir's opinion is arguing over. I don't want to go into too much discussion on this because the laws of purity, as you've seen when we've talked about it before, get very, very complicated. Basically, this is just continuing about animals. And so to the third part of this Mishnah, one may write on them gittin. You can write a get, meaning the divorce document, on the animal. The classic example is the horn of a cow. But Rabbi Yosef Hagalali says that's unfit. What that means is you would write on the horn, and then you would send that as the get to your wife, rather than using a cloth, rather than using a proper piece of parchment. And technically, yes, that was something that was kosher. It was not encouraged. It was not supported. But if you did it, it was considered a correct get. Rabbi Yossi Hagalali says no, because in the Torah it absolutely talks about a scroll, and he took that to mean only a scroll, not something that was document-like. All right, so those points make sense? Moving on to use the cow joke. All right, let's go camping. Chapter 1, Mishnah 8. We are now in a caravan. As you can imagine, if you can imagine, if you lived in the ancient world and you were a merchant, or even just somebody who made regular visits between cities that were more than a day apart, you might sometimes be trapped by Shabbat. You can't travel on Shabbat, but the question then becomes, I am in this neutral territory. It's not a public area. It is not a private area. It is what's called a Carmelit. And in that area, technically by the Torah, I could carry, but by the rabbis, I cannot. So the question then becomes, what can I do to make an area around me and my animals or the caravan where I can carry inside the campsite for this period?
Oh, no. Oh.
So
Oh,
that, go ahead.
Oh, I think I can make it like a fan high thing to fahim, right?
All right, right. So it's going to explain what the option is.
Okay.
Right? So if a caravan camped in a valley, and the valley is just used as an example, it doesn't mean only a valley. If it is camped in a valley and it was surrounded by the instruments used for the cattle, this you might call the tack. It's the yokes, and it's the ropes, and it's the beams that you would use to connect them to the wagons, and all of the different saddles and all of the different things. You're basically piling up a little wall of all of the stuff the animals would normally be wearing and carrying and using. You're using that as a wall around your little area. If you make that wall, provided it forms a fence 10 tefachim high, and the gaps between the little piles do not exceed the built-up parts, right? So you've got your campsite in the middle, and you're putting piles of animal gear all around it, and the piles are 10 tefachim high, they're a meter high, and the gaps are not larger gaps than there are larger walls. Then yes, you can now carry inside of this area. So notice there's no alleyway here, there's no courtyard here, there's no city wall here. You're basically building this temporary little enclosure. And as long as you've got more wall than gap, it's okay. Because any gap which is wider than 10 cubits, it is permitted to carry within because it is like an entrance. If it is greater, then it is forbidden to carry within. Right? So if you've got a 10 cubit gap, that's fine. That's like our alleyway. You make it bigger than 10 cubits, bigger than 15 feet, and now it's just like a hole in the wall. And if your wall isn't complete, then you don't have an area to carry it. Does everyone have the picture there, or do I need to do my shaky mouse drawing?
I got it.
Everyone's good?
Yes.
Okay, because you need to have that in mind before we move on to the next Mishnah. So everyone, you've got the campsite in mind. You see the piles of stuff around it. There are some gaps. There are some entrances.
The animals are dead.
No, no, no. Your animals aren't dead. You're camping. You're not killing them.
No, but because he's surrounded by animal trappings.
No, 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 no. I know that's a great translation in many other versions of the Mishnah, but that translation only works if you're a cowboy, right? So an animal trap, the animal trappings is not like, trapping a bear, right? Animal trappings means the stuff the animals wear. It's one of those great English words that can be multiple terms. It's in the Hebrew, it's like kle behema, right? It's their utensils. The animal's gear would be a better modern English word.
Like the skin or something like that, the bones.
No. Have you spent any time on a farm or with cows or with horses?
Yeah.
Okay. So you know what a saddle is, right? But that you put on the back of the horse to ride?
Yes.
That's animal gear. Or when you have a cow, you have a big yoke that you put around its neck, the ol in Hebrew actually, as in ol malchut shamayim. That big yoke around its neck, that's animal gear. So it's the stuff that the animals use, not their bones, not their skin, not traps to catch them, but it is the stuff they wear. We still use the word trappings in that way in English, but it's pretty rare in normal conversation. You might say he has all the he presented himself like a king. He had all the trappings of royalty. That means he has all the decorations and gear of being a royal person. But yeah, that's why this translation, the USCJ translation, doesn't use the Old English trappings. It goes for instruments, which is closer to the modern translation of the Hebrew anyway. All right, so with that in mind, campsite in the middle, piles of gear around. Let's move on to, oh, where's my mouse? There we go. Let's move on to Mishnah 1.9. All right, so last Mishnah, Mishnah 1.8, we had the piles of stuff. Mishnah 1.9, we are going to see an alternative way to make the fence around your area. And the alternative is you can surround the area with 3 ropes. This one above this one, and this one above this one. So you've got 3 ropes making a little fence, and they have to be attached to posts. So you have to imagine posts in the ground, and then you've tied ropes that go between all the posts. And the ropes are 3 levels. And provided the space between them, between one rope and the other rope, is less than 3 handbreadths. So you've got about a 10-inch gap between each ropes or less. And the size of the ropes must be such that their total thickness is more than 1 handbreadth. So that if you add 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 1, the total height would be 10 handbreadths. Following?
Say it again, Rabbi.
Okay, hold on. Let me give.
The side of the rope. The side of the rope.
I'm going to need to draw. I'm going to need to draw this one, I think. Boom and boom. We'll use this. All right. Post, and time for ropes. So we go up 10 tefachim, and we put a rope. We go up another 10 tefachim, we put a rope. And we go up another 10 tefachim, and we put a rope. Everyone got the picture?
Yeah.
And that means that if we go, that's huge. We go from there to there, that it is a total of 30 tefachim. Sorry, someone's trying to call me, but they're going to have to wait. I guess they forgot I was teaching the class. All right, 30 tefachim. Okay, so what that means is that you end up from top to bottom, from ground to the top rope, you end up with a wall that is 30 tefachim high. Now, what's the problem with this wall? There are huge holes in it.
Yeah, it's more than.
It's more empty space than it is rope. Right? That's not a wall. That's just air with the occasional bit of rope in between it. Okay, so this is where the rabbis have a concept of lavud, and this also comes into play with Sukkot, but let's just deal with it here. And that means that any gap that is 10 or less than 3 handbreadths, that is less than 3 handbreadths, less than about 10 inches. Sorry, that's what happens when you convert. I wrote down the wrong number. I was thinking 30 inches rather than 30 tefachim. Hello? Is it not going to let me edit? Okay, and select, and boom, and delete, and boom. Okay, so 3 tefachim, which is about 10 inches, 10 tefachim total, which is about 30 inches, about a meter-ish. The measurements are rough. Okay, if there is a gap that is 3 or fewer tefachim, about 10 inches or less, and I apologize for those of you who think in centimeters, I can't convert that fast. It's probably in the 20s or so. If it's less than that, then legally, according to halakha, it is considered to be solid. Right? Even though there's a gap, it is still considered solid. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, wait a minute. Why should it be legally solid if there's a gap that is 3 tefachim? But if we can, it's like 10 inches in between there. Okay, so tell me, what would be a better number? 2? 6 inches? 3 inches? 2 inches? 1 inch? Half a millimeter? Right? At some point, you have to admit that even if there is a gap of some measure, that it still counts as closed, because it otherwise would be impossible to ever say that anything was truly solid. Right? Even between bricks, there can be gaps. So the rabbi settled on 3 tefachim as being the acceptable gap that would still be considered as a legally solid piece of material. And so that's why we end up with this unique rope situation. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Everyone else good? I can't see most of your faces, so I can't check. All right, so we're going to clear the drawings and we're going to move on. Okay, chapter 1, Mishnah 10. We are still doing our camping zone, but now we're going to do it with a different method for making our wall around the camp. This time, they may also surround the camp with reeds, provided there is no gap of 3 handbreadths between one reed and the next. So this time they're taking reeds, which are just, sticks that are at least 10 tefachim high. Right? These are, again, 30 inches, about a meter high, and they're shoving them in the ground, making a series of stakes going around the area. And in between the stakes, the gap can't be more than 3 tefachim, more than about 10 inches.
Okay.
So rather than having it go this way, it's now going this way. Everyone got that picture?
Yeah.
And again, the wall is kosher, even though there's a gap, because the gap is invisible legally. It might as well be solid. Okay.
Height have to be 10, no more than 10 tefahim.
Yes, exactly. No more than 10 inches between. The height is 10. Yeah, the height has to be at least 10 tefachim.
Oh, at least.
At least.
What's the maximum?
There really isn't a maximum for this, but I don't think you're going to find that many 20-foot long pieces of reed.
Yes.
That would be pretty unusual.
So, but between if I put it like this, between
Right.
no more the 3 inch, right?
No more than 3 tefachim, three handbreadths.
Three. Okay.
So about 10 inches between them. Okay, so with that in mind, the rabbi spoke only of a caravan, the words of Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda is saying, yeah, but this permission is only if you have a caravan, if you are in a group of people, if you're traveling with a group. And what he's implying is that if you were on your own, you would not be able to do any of these methods. You would just have to sit down with your horse, with your camel, your donkey, whatever, and just wait for Shabbat to finish. And you wouldn't be able to move anything around the campsite. But the sages said that they only spoke of caravans because it is the usual occurrence, meaning that no, an individual could also make a little circle for himself in order to have a space in which he could move things around on Shabbat. And the sages win the argument, by the way. So if you ever go camping and you happen to be camping on Shabbat, you now have a rough idea of how to set up an eruv around your campsite. And if you ever want to go camping and do this with more precision, let me know before you go, and I'll be happy to give you more information.
So we'll be around 4 feet radio.
Well, it could be as big as you want to make it, but in terms of around you, in terms of a radius,
Yeah.
or perimeter if you're doing a square. But if you're only one person, chances are you're not going to make it too big.
Why not?
Well, because to make it larger is more work, right? You're the one sticking every pole in the ground. You're the one tying all the ropes around. Are you really going to carry enough rope to make a 100-foot circle around your camp? That means each rope is going to be, 100 feet long? And that means you need 3 ropes that are each 100 feet long just to have about a 30-foot area around you. That means you're taking 300 feet of rope just to be able to have a little extra walking room on Shabbat. Most people are not going to carry that much when they're by themselves. So yes, it is possible to make it bigger, but you're limited by the labor of one person.
So Rabbi, but the person, if I'm alone, I'm gonna be available to carry because I'm now on the Carmeli dominion, right?
Now, if you are by yourself and you're in this Carmelite, which is what they consider this. The space around your space.
Everything was for itself.
Everything what?
Everything was frozen.
Hello?
From the meaning, I can't.
Yeah, I know. So could you repeat your question?
Oh, when I'm troubled and I'm now in this situation by myself, and I'll be on the Carmeli side, I'll be available to carry, right? If I'm by myself.
No. If it's
even if I'm on the Carmeli dominion?
No. So it's just Yoel and you're out camping and you fell asleep before Friday afternoon and you wake up and there are stars all around you. Tough. You are now stuck where you are. Right? You can't travel and you can't carry in that area.
Oh, okay.
However, if before you take your nap, you set up this little area around you, and then you go to sleep and you wake up and there are stars, still not good that you missed the welcoming Shabbat, but at least the area that you marked with this type of structure, within that area, now you can carry for Shabbat.
Okay.
But only in that area.
Okay.
So in order to mark the area of the Eruv, you need posts And you need a line that connects between the posts, and it could be many lines, one over the other, if they have a gap of no more than 10 inches, correct?
Yes. Or you can make the piles of the animal gear, or you can make the set of posts that go around. Right? So this is what the next little section of the Mishnah is going to tell us. Any partition that is not made up of both vertical and horizontal pieces is not a valid partition. The words of Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, right? So Rabbi Yehuda's son, Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, he says, no, you need both. You can't just do post and rope or just posts. You have to have posts and ropes to bind it all together.
And that's the halacha, I must say.
No, it isn't. But the sages say one of the two is enough. Meaning you can do just a few posts, enough to hold the rope up, or you can do a bunch of posts, but no rope in between them. Either way is fine.
Because I try to remember how they were the military bases in Israel, because each military base, no matter how small it is, was an Eruv. On Shabbat, you could carry whatever you want.
Right.
And I can remember that we are so sophisticated, like the perimeter outside. Like they were posts, but between the posts were lines, okay, of course, for protection. But I think they were over 10 inches, because 10 inches is pretty close. And I think they were between the lines were more than 10 inches.
All right, so we'll, like I said, in terms of the modern way an Eruv works, we're going to have to leave that for later, because yes, in the modern Eruv within a city, the halacha is a little different for now. Right now, what we're talking about is making a space in the middle of the wilderness, right? And in most, I'd imagine most army bases would be considered a settled area. It's not a random camping trip. The army base has been there for some time, and you plan to still be there on Sunday. So it's a different set of rules that are for permanent dwellings rather than temporary dwellings like the caravan.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, the laws of Eruvin, when you think about them in the modern world, are going to confuse you until we get a lot more of the Masechet done. And then there's the whole issue of halacha l'maaseh, of how the halacha has been interpreted over the last 2,000 years, which is also going to make it seem different. But since you're talking about soldiers, thank you for the segue, because the end of this Mishnah talks about soldiers. I don't know whether you looked ahead and thought about that or not,
no, that was my memory. Try to connect.
All right, well, you're a Navi because you knew what was coming. So they exempted 4 obligations for soldiers in an encampment. They may bring wood from anywhere. They are exempt from washing of the hands. They are exempt from separating tithes of doubtfully tithed produce, what we call demai, and they are exempt from setting up an eruv. So if you're, and only one of these has to do with eruvin, the other 3 are different cases. If you are a soldier and you are out on war and you are making the camp because you're preparing for battle tomorrow, they do not make you set up an eruv. Remember, as I said before, the eruv in the Carmelit in the wilderness is a rabbinic restriction and not a Torah restriction. And since you are out fighting a war in order to survive and defend the nation, the rabbis are not going to force you to follow their rabbinic restriction if it would compromise what you need to do to defend yourself. So the eruv is not necessary if you are a soldier making camp. The other 3 are also very interesting. The bringing of wood from everywhere. Well, imagine you are a camper and you are out, hiking between towns, and you stop for the night to get wood. Don't mean on Shabbat, just any day. Whose wood are you taking? You have to be sure that you're not taking wood from someone else's property. Because if you're taking the wood for your fire from someone else's property, that's called stealing. But the rabbis are saying if it's a soldier, because this is where the camp is, then the soldier can, in fact, go and get any firewood that's necessary in order to make sure their fires are lit, that they actually have fires. Does everyone understand that one?
Yes.
Okay. The washing of the hands, there's an interesting little debate about this, that this is for netilat yadayim, the washing of the hands we do before we eat bread. And again, that was a rabbinic enactment. And the rabbis were also saying you don't need to do this because washing of the hands would require water. And they didn't have hoses. They didn't have wells when they were out traveling. They didn't have giant water tanker trucks. And so requiring water when they were out in the field would force them to have to spend time looking for the water, more water than they would need just to drink. And so the rabbi said, you don't need to do this. However, there's a debate about mayim achronim, which is at the end of a meal. The rabbis talk about doing another hand washing before Birkat Hamazon. The reason for this had nothing to do with the halakha of purity, nothing to do with the laws of the sages. It was about safety. The rabbis were very worried that the way people would eat would involve dipping their hands in salt to get the salt for their food, and that then there were certain types of salt, especially the salt of Sodom, as in Sodom and Gomorrah, that if you got it near your eye, you could go blind. And so they wanted people to always wash their hands after they finished eating, not just before they finished, not just before they ate. But the washing at the end was entirely a safety precaution, much like the extra washing we've all been getting used to over the last month and a half. Right? It's just a safety precaution. It's just to keep you from getting from getting an illness. And so they said, the rabbis, when they talked about that type of washing, they said that type of washing you still have to do, because we definitely don't want our soldiers going blind when they're out in the field. And the demai, the doubtful produce, this was a precaution, the rabbi said. They said, look, if you buy fruits and vegetables and other things that should be tithed from somebody who is maybe not exactly so careful with Jewish law, then you have to do your own tithe just to make sure that it got done. But if it's a soldier and you're out in the field, then you don't need to do that extra set of precaution. We good?
Rabbi.
Yes.
That's the washing hand when you yes. when we finish to eat. That's the prayer you just wash you wash my finger. And
right.
And that's the one the prayer you say Mayin Aromin.
Right. The Mayim Achronim.
Okay.
Right. Okay, so we got a little bit sidetracked in the middle. I'm trying to think, because the next section is all about a well, and it goes on for 3 or 4 Mishnayot. I think we're going to save this for next week, because once we started, I want to keep going, because each piece builds on the previous Mishnah, and I'm not sure that it would be very clear if we did the first Mishnah tonight and then do the next Mishnahs next week, especially if somebody was not here this week and then came. We're going to stop here. I think I've added enough to your knowledge of Eruvin for one night.
I forgot, Rabbi. My bad. I forgot last week. I don't pay attention when I see the Mishnah. What's going on? I forget.
That's fine. Go back and review and read from the handout, the introduction.
Yes.
Right. That's why I share the document in the chat, so that people can go back and review whenever they need. The document, I think, covers the first 5 chapters, and if you want to read ahead, Hareze Meshubach, this is wonderful. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with reading ahead.
Rabbi.
Yes.
When you put it on the this on YouTube, can you use tie like what shot we be? That way it's easy for me to follow.
I can go
If
back
you
and
can-
double check because I used to do that when I was doing it through YouTube in the synagogue, but the Zoom YouTube blend doesn't let me easily edit the description. So
Okay.
I'll need to go back and double check and see if there's a way I can do that.
Yeah, because you know, some